Well, good evening, listeners. You're listening to Lament of Hope podcast. And I say this a lot when I do these introductions, but I just love how varied the podcast is and how many people I've talked to. I've just learned so much and gained so much. And I'm fascinated that I get to intersect with so many different people's lives just for an hour, 45 minutes of their life, 45 minutes of mine. But it's so cool to gain some insights into something I didn't know before, or just honestly to have a good conversation that encourages me or helps me to think more deeply about the world. And today I actually have Dr. Catherine Raven with me. Um, Many of you, I don't know if heard of her book, but it's a New York Times bestseller. It's called, I want to make sure I don't mess it up, Fox and I, An Uncommon Friendship. And I came across this and I was just fascinated because, for those of you who know me personally, I love animals, but also I was just fascinated by the story of a human kind of intersecting with an animal and actually forming a friendship with an animal in the wild, and how that kind of impacted Catherine's life. And she wrote a book about this. But Catherine herself has many degrees. She in zoology and then I believe botany,
Mhm.
correct?
Yes.
From the University of Montana. She has a PhD. She's written several essays on natural science subjects. So I'm excited. I think this conversation is going to be very interesting. But thank you so much, Catherine, for coming on the podcast.
You're welcome. It's nice to meet you and your listeners. And thank you for reading the book. It really means a lot to me. I wrote it for Fox. You probably know that because I wanted him to matter. He wanted to matter, and I really want people to read about him. Yeah.
So, for listeners, obviously, listeners, I encourage you to get this book. So, we're not going to give out everything about it. And obviously, a book is much more intimate than a 45-minute conversation. But, Catherine, just to kind of start out, I wanted, when I was reading your bio and how much you seem to love nature and animals, and you've kind of, I mean, that's your life career, your passion in many ways. Um, and I mean, you were even a park ranger in the past. I
Yes.
mean, what kind of gave you, how did that start? Like as a kid, were you just fascinated with nature or?
I think it did start. I didn't come from a family that was nature oriented at all. So you said, did it just come? It must have just come from inside me. And one of the things you learn when you study biology, I have a doctorate in biology and I'm still teaching at the university level. So when you learn about genes and molecules and chemicals, one of the things you learn is that there's only so far that genes can take you that decide who you are and what you are. The fact that you have two eyes, that's your genes. But we also have something else. Some people call it a soul, or some people call it a spirit. And I don't see how that's in any way related to anything that we can see or touch or feel, that we can understand. It's not related to genes. That's just something that's intrinsically you. And our society doesn't really understand it any better than humans did 100,000 years ago. But we have something inside us, and I think that I've always heard that calling to the natural world. I remember that being a place that I just loved, finding one little teeny tiny wildflower under a tree, finding one little creek somewhere, and how sad I would be when new houses would go up in a place where I'd be riding my bicycle to, and then suddenly that little creek wasn't there anymore. That's not something that I inherited from my genes, but that's just something that's me. And something else that I learned about that you're asking about nature through my life, I just thought everybody had the same feeling about the natural world. And so it definitely is my own spirit that feels this way because I've learned that some people really are honestly city people and they belong there and they're happy and People need to be where they belong and where they're happy. And city people would be very unhappy to find themselves immersed in a natural world all the time. It's great for vacations and a little bit of a break. And maybe even it's great for somebody to go to a park even every day for a few minutes. But city people need to be in a city, and country people need to be in the country or the wilderness, just like there's beach people and ocean people and desert people and mountain people. And people really need to find, and that's one of the things I learned from my relationship with the fox, which you need to find your optimal habitat and your optimal habits, of course. Anyway,
Did
that was
you,
lovely for asking.
well, I was gonna say when you grew up, what was your favorite place? You mentioned bike, you mentioned a creek. Was there a place you would go quite often that kind of for you, when you think childhood, is kind of the picture you would put yourself in the background?
I think taking my bike by myself and going way out beyond where all the houses ended. Mm, some of your listeners might be younger than me, younger than you even. I don't think their life is as safe as ours was. We grew up, I grew up. I mean, the world, as we get more people in the world's just going to become less safe because the same percentage of people are violent as always were. That just means the world's going to become less safe, I suppose. It didn't feel so unsafe when I was a kid to take your bicycle way out where it's isolated and be all by yourself, where there are no houses around and no people around beyond where all the suburbias ended. And that's where I can still picture that place where there'd be in a little tiny woods and a little tiny creek, and thought it was the most beautiful thing in the world. And I live that way now. It's safe. I feel it's safe where I am now, that away from entirely away from people. But I'm not sure parents want their little children to go beyond anymore. That doesn't mean they should keep them inside, but I definitely had a place that was outdoors, that was entirely nature's world, where you would look around and the only man-made part of the world would be the clothing that I was wearing. You know, my flip-flops and my sweater would be man-made, and everything else around it was just God-made, everything. It was amazing.
And I'm guessing you just listen to the sounds as opposed to now, we've got all the phones and the headphones. So even if you're out in nature, you're listening to music or something, you're not really connected to anything. But for you, I'm guessing you just
Right.
enjoyed the music of the nature around you.
That's true. And even now, and even for all of my life, when I was a college student and I jogged inside in the gym, I might have had headphones on then. But when I'm outside running or skiing or whatever I'm doing, but I notice so many people jog with music in their ears, and I've never done that. Even just jogging, when I'm on a street side jogging, I still am just listening. And so it's sure you can hear some cars sometimes when you do that, but you can also you hear the wind and the birds and the everything. No, I don't like to have the music in my ears. I have music time is good for when you just want to listen to the music, because
Mhm.
music is amazing. So I listen to music when it's just to listen to the music, but not to help me jog faster or lift weights more or something like that.
It's interesting because a lot of people, I think, and I struggle with this myself, we like to do a lot of things at the same time because if it ha we have to think, right? If we don't listen to music and we're just jogging and we're listening to nature, that's way too much quiet. And then you start thinking, and you always think about the things you don't want to think about, right? And so then you just if you've got those earplugs in, listening to a show or music, then you can just, you don't have to. There's so much noise that your brain won't work to start thinking about something. I mean, for you, has that ever been something like did you grow in that discipline of not having to?
Yes, I taught myself that. And one thing is, as far as being quiet and not having the things in your ears and doing more than one thing you'll read about in my book is why I'm just not a multitasker. And I was growing up during that era when that term became not just fashionable, but that term became like the goal that we were supposed to it was supposed to be good to be a multitasker, but I'm definitely not a multitasker. And when I drive the 30 miles that I have to drive if I want to get something to eat, any kind of food at all, I have to go like 30 some miles one way. I don't have the music on in my car or the radio on in my car. I mean, it's true. I'm seeing bald eagles and golden eagles and cranes and things along the road. And maybe we're not all living in places where you see things along the road like that. So I can't speak to maybe if you're in a city. But anyway, when I'm going the distance, I don't have music on. I'm just enjoying the view. But I used to have that exact same thing that you have. And it still happens once in a while where thoughts come into your head and you don't want them. And you can hear that person like sitting on your shoulder screaming at you. Um, Maybe it's somebody that you grew up with and you want to make it go away. But I have learned I can't make it not come in, but I can make it go away really fast because I have a favorite image, and my mind is just like a series of images. So I keep these images, but I have one favorite one from when I was a backcountry ranger at Mount Rainier. That's the one I pick to go quickly to that one image. Most of chapter 2 in the book, I think, is about that spot, although I don't explain that I use it this way in the book. But I go back to that image at Three Lakes in Mount Rainier, and I can easily put that image in my mind quickly. And that makes the bad image. And that image isn't just visual, but because it's a place where I've actually been and stood. So you can't just take a picture, see something pretty and think, I'm going to think that, because it's only visual. It has to actually be a place where you were, because there has to be sounds. You have to feel if it was a hot day, a misty day, a sunny day, you have to have the sound of the little tree frogs. If in my case, that's what the sound was in the background mostly that I liked. But that place, you really have to know it. And in my case, it was more than 2 decades ago. But I know that one scene really, really well. And I do talk in the book about how my mind is images and how I've learned to keep these images and their talismans and how they protect me. But I haven't described it specifically the way that you said, because I didn't realize other people, until you told me this, Danielle, I didn't realize that other people have that same problem where you have an active mind like I do. It's restless. And if nothing's coming in it, like music, bad things start to try to creep in. The
Yeah.
scenes from the past that you're trying to forget, you never will forget. You have to switch it out like remember those little photo things you used to go click, click, and just have
Yes.
click and get another photo in there. That just make sure it's a place you've actually been. So if you don't have a place like that, if you guys that are listening and you don't have a place like that, go find one and make it your place and get to know it really, really well, and then store that in your mind. And then when the bad things come prowling in, you can wipe them out with the good image. It works, honestly.
Hmm. What, and if this is too personal, let me know, but what did you find would often come to mind if you weren't listening to something?
Well, I won't say, I mean, it is probably too personal, but um, I will say this. It's, I always had good school experiences. I was never bullied at school, so that was good. And school was always a safe place for me. I will say that. But yeah, I have had bad scenes, and they tend to come back, and they're associated usually with screaming.
Mm.
And so
So when you hear screams now, any sort of screaming, is that triggering for you?
no, I remember when I went to I went to the Bob Bondurant Race Driving Academy, and in addition to doing the race driving, I did pursuit driving because I was going to the Park Service, and we sometimes have to be in vehicles when there's lots of. I mostly worked in the backcountry, but you sometimes have to be in vehicles when there's lots of noise around. Fire trucks, for example. I was also a wildland firefighter. There's noise from fire and ambulance and people screaming and things flashing. And when I did that course at the Race Driving Academy, The instructor that was sitting next to me said he's never seen anybody just shut down immediately with the noise and the lights. He said, usually people get worked up and hit the accelerator and go faster. But he said, with you, it's just the opposite. I've
Hmm.
learned in that kind of a situation, it doesn't make me more agitated. It makes me disappear very quickly.
So I guess that served you well in some ways for those type of jobs.
Yes, that's true. I'm not easy to excite, I would say. Yeah. And you know, you have to learn as a college professor or as a ranger, you can't really let people offend you or upset you because you're the highest ranked person in that situation, and this is the way society works. If you're a professor, you can let the dean upset you because they're higher ranked and they're responsible for the relationship. But people that you're responsible for, I mean, the highest ranked person in society in a relationship is the one that needs to show the grace always. So if you're the person wearing a sidearm and a badge, you're the highest ranked person and you need to show the grace.
Hmm.
In a family, a lot of people don't understand this. We have a serious shortage of good parents in the world. Parents can go on and on and on about how their little 3-year-old or 4-year-old is this and this and this, but a parent is responsible for that relationship. They're the
Hmm.
ones with the highest rank in society. They're the ones that have to show the grace. It's not the kids that are supposed to be showing the grace because they're just low ranked. So it does serve you, I think, well to learn not to let people rile you up or upset you because when you are working as a ranger and when you are working as a professor, if you're not that kind of person, you're going to have so many problems in your job because students, you know, they can't help it. I mean, they will rile you up, or people that have their dog off a leash in the national park. You can't let people upset your calmness, really, your control and your calmness and your ability to empathize with them.
What what for you when you were a ranger, what was the hardest thing you think for you to keep your cool and relate and try to be empathetic to somebody?
I think it was always easy for me to keep my cool, I would say, in pretty stressful situations, always. I'm not sure I was ever, I know one gentleman wrote a letter to the superintendent about how he witnessed me and was so shocked at how calm I was in a situation where we were having, illegal things going on at a campground and
Hmm.
just in the backcountry because, you're working without any much support when you're way in the backcountry. And that's one of the things that I never hesitated to do was call for help or say that I couldn't do something.
Hmm.
And I do remember one day, well, we got a lot of lightning strikes in the Mount Rainier area for sure. It's not a forest that burns very often. It's basically like asbestos, but the ridges get a lot of lightning hits. And I remember in a lightning storm, I was really hunkered down, and my supervisor was calling for me to do something. And I answered back and said, I don't feel safe, so I'm not going to move. I'm just going to stay here and wait. And when I got back in the front country, all the guys, because everyone was a guy in those days, was like, how could you do that? I mean, everybody heard you say that you didn't feel safe. Um, but I'm not afraid of admitting that I'm needing help. It's so
Hmm.
inspiring to find how welcoming the world is when you get to be a grown up and go out and make your own world. You can find a lot of really amazing people. No, my boss didn't care at all. My boss got along really well. He was wonderful. He didn't care at all that I said, no, I'm not going to do that because I don't feel safe doing it. So I'm just going to wait till the lightning passes and then I'll go do whatever needed to be done.
Well, I'm glad that you had a good boss because some bosses may not take that well.
Yes, I had a great boss. I've been lucky, but then I don't move jobs very often. But I think that I haven't had stability of housing very much. But when I finally bought this place, the place where I met Fox, I finally did have that stability. But I am a person who people have to have some kind of stability in their life. So you might be the kind of person who's having the same family from the time you were born until you're like 80 years old or whatever. And that's where you are on your holidays and your important times, and that's your stability. But you have to have some kind of stability in your life. And if you don't have that, you should have you should make a house. You should buy a house, buy a little piece of land, even if all you can do is put a tent on it, which is, as you know, what I did when I bought this land. And then it's the same with the job. Like your job kind of becomes your family to you also, if you're a person
Yeah.
that needs that kind of stability as well. But yeah, I hope people don't stay in it's sad that people have to stay with bosses that they because that's like all day long almost.
Yeah, that's
And I
true.
can't think of a bad boss that I've had. So that's
It's a gift. Yeah.
yeah.
You know, so for listeners and just kind of give an introduction to your book, how did you meet Fox?
He was determined to meet me. I was very determined to fit in into the natural world around me, my property, but he wasn't on my list because he's a fox. So that's one thing. And also, I mean, I just didn't want to get close to a predatory animal, even being as small as he was. I was really trying to get friendly with the magpies. They don't like me. They still don't. And these are all different magpies, but they still thump on the roof. But I was going for the smaller things for sure, little birds and such. So I was outside all the time, so he could see me outside all the time. But I didn't want to make friends with the fox. But he was determined, and I spent a great deal of time, as you'll see in the book, trying to figure out why. What is it that he gets from me? Because I wasn't feeding him and I wasn't giving him shelter. Why did he? And some of the things, you can never really know why another person, another creature does what they do. But I spent a lot of time trying to figure it out, and I would kind of I'd think one thing and then cross another thing off the list. And one thing for sure is that it's kind of dopey to be all by yourself in the wilderness. That's for sure. And I'm a big mammal with hands. I can do, I'm pretty useful as in terms of a friend. Um, but anyway, so he was smarter, but he had a lot of other animals that he associated with. I mean, he had his own little den. There were other foxes there, and he seemed to get along with other animals in the area. But I was struggling. So the relationship came about the way it did because he started it. And then I kind of just followed along, first just trying to ditch him. One obvious reason why I would ditch a fox, besides that he's a fox, is that I had a PhD and I knew that, these animals don't have personalities. And we weren't allowed to anthropomorphize. That's a really bad word. If you're in the Park Service, you were not allowed to give bears, and even the ones that come around every single day, you're not supposed to give them names, and you're not supposed to give human attributes to animals. And to me, I changed my whole attitude and belief and understanding of what anthropomorphism means and what things we shouldn't do. And I think it's really ridiculous to put a little outfit on a wild animal, a human clothing, that's anthropomorphizing. But to think that they have some personality traits that we have is not ridiculous or wrong. I mean, we're so closely related to them. We can't just have all of our personality traits be just human traits. We have to share some traits with them for sure. And I think the people that own pets know that, but pets are a little bit of a different situation. This is a wild animal, Fox was.
So how did Fox first make his introduction to you?
He showed up. I saw him in the distance, of course, and I tried to stay away from him. His mother was huge, bright red, and I realized that if you're a bright, bright, bright red and very big animal, you probably aren't going to be very friendly because you're a target, right? But he was really tiny and not bright red, but I still kind of kept away. But then he showed up at the door, and I think he knocked on my door. I still think that because I don't have a doorbell. If you know the book, you know I'm not a very friendly person, so I'm not the kind of person that would build a house with a doorbell. So there's no doorbell
And no welcome mat.
and no welcome mat. But I heard knock, knock, and I was in the kitchen. Well, there's only two rooms in my house. There's one room downstairs and there's one room upstairs. Upstairs has a bathroom attached, but it's just one room. And I was cooking and I heard the knock, knock. And I have a long driveway and it's gravel, and you would hear somebody coming. I mean, you can hear a pin drop in my house, but there weren't any cars around. No one lived close enough to walk. Knock, knock. So I looked out the door and there was a fox, and he wasn't sitting close enough to have knocked on the door by the time I opened it and looked out. He's close to the door, but not close enough to have knocked. And he looked down the driveway, and then he looked at me and he looks down the driveway like somebody's down there. I realize why people think foxes are sneaky and clever and sly, because he was doing that on purpose. He was trying to get me to think that there was somebody down the driveway who was, in case it was a bad thing to knock, like in case I was going to be mad, he wanted to like divert the attention to the bad door knocker down the driveway. Then if I wasn't, I mean, he's just looking. So then, knock, knock. He's sitting there. I went all the way around the house. There's nobody. There's no human beings. Nobody's there. I figured that he had knocked and then moved back. This he later he would I realized what he was doing was taking a rock. It was about the size of a brownie, and he was pushing it against the door. So he wasn't able to boom, 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 boom like that. And also he was soaking wet, which was really strange because it almost never rains in Montana. It certainly doesn't rain hard enough for little animals to get wet. I mean, the raindrops are like you can usually like dodge them. And he was really wet. So it made me kind of feel sorry for him. I thought somebody dunked him in the creek. I mean, how is he soaking wet on a misty day like this, just drenched? So he looked really pitiful. The whole thing was a ruse, of course, but that's how we met. Um, and then there was the dog incident, which made me want to. He started out seeming like he really needed me a lot. And so I felt sorry for him, started getting curious. But actually, of course, I needed him just as much. But he had dogs chase him. And that never, I mean, we're not allowed to have dogs run loose in this valley. So it was a really rare thing to hear dogs barking. And I saw this fox go running by the hills, past my house, up in the hills, two dogs behind him. And it's just awful to see these dogs chasing a fox. So then I started chasing the dogs and the fox. And then I wondered afterwards, how did he know? I went in the house and I felt really bad. And I lost sight of them. And I thought that was just the stupidest thing to do. But it was just instinct. Here I am running after them, holding a broom. How does the fox know that I'm not just somebody else chasing him? So now he's got two dogs and a crazy lady chasing him. And he knew because later that night, that same night of me running after him, he came right back to the door, knock, knock. So he knew that I was trying to get the dogs away from him. I don't know how, but I have come to understand that animals, we're animals, we know a lot more about people than we let on, than we admit. If we stop all the masking, getting confused because of culture, we see this person's title is such and such, and this. and they must be a good person and that must be a bad person. But we actually have the ability to understand motivations, or Homo sapiens wouldn't have survived as long as we have. When I go to a big valley, like say in Yellowstone, the Lamar Valley in Yellowstone, I'll be witnessing bison and antelope and cranes, bears. I'll be there for an hour or more, and all these animals are interacting. And the animals that that bear can eat don't run every time a bear comes by, and the squirrels don't run away every time a coyote comes by, but they will run if that coyote wants to eat them. So they have to, I mean, animals know, you have to know the good guys from the bad guys. And we know that too. So I don't think it's so strange. It's just that people have become such bad. Some people say, I'm just such a bad judge of character. I'm such, deep inside, we're great judges of character. We inherited the ability to judge character. All of us did. We just lost that ability because we get distracted by what people are wearing, what their title is, their words that trick us. But really, we're great judges of character. If you just stop and think and work on that, you'll find that you are a great judge of character.
Hmm.
And certainly the fox, he just, he knew. It seemed like such an odd thing to me, but as my relationship with him grew and I started to get more in touch with human nature, I realized that that wasn't so odd, that he knew that I wasn't just chasing after him, that I was trying to get rid of the dogs and save him.
How did that relationship grow between you and the fox?
I think because he wanted it very badly and I was curious. We went a long way just with my curiosity and his determined, absolutely dogging me around and determined that I was going to be his friend. And that's really important, or it would not have happened because I was trying to ditch him and I continue to try to ditch him for a very long time in the relationship. But my curiosity kept me peeking at him, watching him all the time, trying to figure out what he was up to. And I thought, maybe I can use him. I do have a doctorate in science, and maybe I can use him. Like he can be a subject of study. And then I realized that I cared about him too much to do that. But I didn't really want him as a friend for a very long time. And then I realized very late in the relationship that friendship, yeah, is so important. You just really need one really good friend, someone who really trusts you a lot. It makes all the difference to have one um, partner, buddy. And, we were seeing each other every single day. For a long time, the relationship went on that way when I decided I was going to try to be his friend. Every day, seeing each other, walking together, playing games together. And it was really quite inspiring. And it totally built up my self-esteem tremendously because, he worried about me, cared about me, trusted me.
How would you give an
Need one.
example? Oh, I was gonna say, how did you give an example of him worrying about you? How did you see that displayed?
So when there would be like a lot of noise, for example, like on a 4th of July, and there's all these fireworks or something going on, then he would come around. Now, I didn't always see everything he was doing with my eyes, even though I saw him every day. I use spy cameras also. I didn't start the spy cameras because of him. I started the spy cameras before I even met him to figure out who was eating what on my property. Like what are the skunks eating and what are the badgers digging up? And because I needed to know who to blame for whatever. I was first just blaming the deer for everything. Well, the rodents, then the deer. The spy cameras are really helpful. Sometimes I can see them in a spy camera.
So like Mr.
Um,
McGregor from Beatrix Potter.
As I have Bushnell spy cameras. I still use them. I really saw a bobcat in one the other day. That was fun. Anyway, the other one other thing, I was far away from the front of my house, and he came by and he stood on his hind legs and put his two hands in the windows, in the bay windows, and peered in. And I thought, he's missing me. That just really, I thought that was really quite amazing. He just checking. I wasn't in the place I was normally in at that time. And I did the same thing the night we had, I can't remember what it was on the Richter scale, and we use a magnitude scale now, but it was probably, it wasn't over a 7 earthquake, but it was a big one. And I felt it, and I was in bed reading. So it was strong enough that I felt it. And I immediately went up to his den just to sit outside because I was worried about him being alone when something like that's happening. Just like he came down to my place when there were all these fireworks, all that noise from all the fireworks, and he was wondering how I was doing. So it's um it's how you it's instinct to care about your neighbors or your friend.
What did he ever come into your house or did you have that
Oh.
bound?
No, I know that people do let wild. I'm not a fan of that. I have to say, I mean, because there's a big difference between a pet and a wild animal. And that's one of the big differences between pets and wild animals is that wild animals don't come into your house. So you're with them on the neutral ground, which is the outdoors, the wild spaces. That's the neutral ground. And you don't let them into your house.
So you really considered Fox, yes, a friend, but at the same time he was wild. You didn't consider him a pet.
Exactly, because you can consider your pets your friends, but actually they're not. I mean, they're not, pets are a wonderful thing, but they're very, very different than your actual friends who are with you by choice. But your pets aren't necessarily with you by choice. I mean, if you feed them, you take care of them, you put a roof over their head, they're no more there by choice than a 4-year-old is living in the, I mean, a 4-year-old can't just move out of their parents' house. And dogs are really neotenous wolves. They're wolves, same genus, same species as a wolf, but they're not quite fully, matured. They never actually grow up to adulthood the way a wolf does. So that's just the case of a dog. But any pet, they're dependent on you. And I wanted him to be with me by choice so that I could really see that somebody actually chose to be with me and didn't have to. They actually wanted to be. They actually thought I had some kind of a value or interest or something that they would want to spend time with me. And that was really important. And that's really why people should, one important reason why you should get to know animals in the wild, in addition to your pets, because again, your pets, the advantage of a pet, of course, is you can pick it up and actually physically pet it. So there's that tactile stimulation you can get with a pet, which is great. And you can't get that in the wild, but you should have the wild animal too, because it's it's they're just as free living as you are, and they choose you.
Did you touch the fox?
No, I could have. We were close enough, but I didn't because that is so rude and disrespectful. Again, he would be within arm's length of me, and I could have, of course, touched him. But if I was within arm's length of a 2 or 3 or 4-year-old adorable little kid, I don't just squeeze their little cheeks because they're such cute little babies. I mean, that's just rude. And when I'm with my friends, I don't just rub their hair just because they're close enough that I can do that. I mean, invading somebody else's space to touch them just because you're bigger and because you can, it's just disrespectful. And I wanted to treat him again, not like a pet, but like an actual individual.
I've got to say, because your statement can be very controversial for some people, because they really think their pets are their friends. And I was gonna ask you,
Well, their
well,
pets love them, can't they? Even though, I mean, little
well,
kids love their pets.
I was gonna say, because there are,
Pets
there's
still love them.
stories. Yeah, there are stories and even personal experiences I've had where like an animal senses an emotion you're experiencing,
Yeah.
and they actually out of their own free will, you don't grab them or anything. They actually come up to you and whether they put their paws on you or for a cat. they sit on your chest to calm a panic attack you're having, and they're not trained to do that. They just sense something's wrong. That,
Yeah,
in that sense, you're like, it almost, in that way, it seems like they are choosing you, even though they're not feeding you in that moment or gaining anything necessarily. In fact, it's usually to their discomfort, you know?
yeah. It's in that moment they're choosing you, but the entire relationship wasn't a relationship based on choice. But
Yeah, I see
again,
what you mean.
your pets still love you. I mean, unless you have a bad relationship with your pet, but definitely if you believe your pet, you would if your pet loves you, and your pet certainly does have that ability. Just because you're feeding it or keeping it in the house and giving it things doesn't mean it doesn't love you. I mean, if you're married, Danielle, your spouse is with you because he or she is legally obligated to be with you. But that doesn't mean they don't love you just because they have a legal obligation to be there. Um, so it doesn't abrogate love. It just means that it's different to have a wild animal friend than it is to have a
Right.
pet friend. And cats are different. Cats and dogs are different than foxes in the sense that they've been genetically adapted to be close to humans for a much longer period of time than
Yeah.
foxes have. And it's possible that foxes had that same relationship with us at one time, but they certainly don't anymore. And cats and dogs do. So cats and dogs definitely are animals that are bred to really understand us and communicate with us really, really well.
Did you ever have a friend as close as Fox?
Not at the time of Fox. No, 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 no.
So you
It's
didn't have many human interactions at this time that you were really plugged in with
that's
Fox.
that's true. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
What?
And I would have had, I think, animal pets at my house, but I hadn't been. I mean, I was still living in a tent. I mean, I hadn't been there very long when I realized there was all this wildlife around, and that was a very different thing. And I mean, I know that if you have a dog, that's kind of unless it's an indoor dog, but even if it's an indoor dog, I think the wild animals would smell the dog on you. So it's difficult to have both relationships. I mean, it's difficult to have a cat and also have a close relationship with wildlife, although some people do keep their cats inside all the time.
Right.
um, but dogs, yeah, you can't, a dog running around outside and a dog marking the territory is going to keep a fox from marking the territory in almost all cases, I would think. It just makes it more difficult to have. And I travel a lot now. I guess I've always have traveled a lot in the sense that I am teaching in the field and working in the field and a lot of days away. And I live by myself, so nobody to take care of a dog or a cat. But I don't want you to think that I'm negative on that because I think those relationships are wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to say that and because I didn't think you were
Oh,
purposely
I love to visit
demeaning
somebody's
pets.
house when they have a cat. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I mean, dogs, because they're so variable, you get to see some really outstandingly beautiful, amazing dogs. But I do, cats. I love cats too. Yeah. Just as long as they're not outside eating things they're not supposed to eat, but songbirds.
What for you was the most touching moment you had with Fox?
The one that made me decide to write a book for him about him so that people could understand him was when he brought his second batch of kits over to my house, because that made me realize that he really trusted me. And that's when I realized this relationship is more special than any other one that I've had. He brought them over and it was moonlight and they were really tiny and they were running wild. And then he curls up and pretends to go to sleep so that I'm left to babysit his four precious little babies. And it was amazing. And they were just bouncing and bopping all over the place. There's this weasel that lives in the draw, and weasel's pretty dangerous to a baby fox. But he trusted me to take care of his babies, just me all by. It was his job.
And
Um,
they didn't touch you or anything? They were just
no, No, they were just running around. They were playing.
Wow. Wow.
It really, and I thought, wow, you really put a lot of trust in me, um, to do that. I was shocked and I was really amazed. And that was a really special moment for me that, he cared that much. Yeah.
How long did you watch them? Was it a couple hours or?
Well, the moon was out. I'm not sure. Small periods of time seem really long. I timed times with him because I was curious what his sitting time was when he would just sit and listen to me, just sit, not playing games, not running around, and I counted up a lot of them and averaged it out to 18 minutes. So I knew that his own sitting time was 18 minutes. And so that night probably wasn't that much longer than that because he doesn't like to be still much more than that. I mean,
So
if in his den, he certainly would be if he was really, really hiding. But to be out in the open, I think that was just his, maybe he had attention deficit disorder. 18, that was his
that's
time. I think
that's
he's
still
developed.
pretty long for a wild
Yeah,
animal.
I think it's because sitting too long in one spot makes you too vulnerable.
Yeah. Did he, when you said you mentioned when you talked 18 minutes, like you would talk to him just about life and he would just listen to you?
I started reading to him because I was reading to myself, reading my own books, just sitting outside reading when he would come around and he would sit, and then it's kind of awkward. So just instinct, I mean, I'm reading and he's just staring at me, and you can't really just read when a fox is sitting there staring at you. So he doesn't want to hear me read my graduate students, ecology work, right? It's really boring and lots of data. So I went in the house to try to find something that, we could both understand that wouldn't be really difficult. And I got a copy of The Little Prince. That was easy. And I enjoy that too. Not also it's illustrated, which is great. So then and also I know that story really well, whereas the ecology textbooks I'm reading, I don't know, can't really paraphrase. The Little Prince I could paraphrase as well as read. So I would read, and then I would look at him and I would hold up, and then it would be like, it's your turn. Then I would read. And then sometimes I would see what was going on that page and I would remember that part of The Little Prince. And then I would just explain to him what was happening in the story. Then I would shut up and just look so that he knew that I was interacting with him. And I think any advanced animal like that can figure out what's happening. I mean, he can
Did he,
tell
you think
acting.
was there ever a moment where like he would look at a picture and put his paw up or like how did you know he was engaging and not just
Oh,
staring?
because he's watching it. I mean, he's not like looking at butterflies or sniffing for mice or something like that. I mean, he's watching me and I'm watching him. So it was when
Wow.
I'm reading, I can't see him, but when I stop reading and look up and hold picture, I can see that he's looking at the picture. So he knows that I meant this is for you. This is take a look. Yeah, I think it's the same way that he would interact with another animal. And
But
that's
still, I mean, what a unique gift
distinctive.
you were given.
Patience is, a lot of people just don't have the patience. I honestly I am sure I spent more time with him even in a year, but certainly in more than a year, like over year after year, more time than spouses spend with each other, probably. I mean, we spent a lot of time together. And that is patience. I mean, that just takes a lot of patience. And you have spouses that are both working. I mean, I'm not counting the time they're together when they're sleeping because they're not actually interacting, but
Sure.
interacting, we certainly spent more time. And we weren't bogged down by trying to trick each other with funny little words that like say things that don't really mean what we're saying. And because you don't have that option when you're with another being, another individual that doesn't speak your language. So you can't
Right.
actually fool them. So everything is just based on body language and
Yeah.
your understanding of how they're feeling at that moment. When he would leave, I learned, talk about body language and things we can understand. I finally learned there are two reasons why he gets up and leaves. The same two reasons why you get up and leave when you're with someone. Either because he had to go somewhere or because he wanted to leave me. Those are two separate things. But if you just look at what he's doing, he's just getting up and he's moving. But sometimes he gets up and he's moving because he can smell a mouse or the vixen's calling or something. I mean, he's getting up because he has to be somewhere else. And sometimes it's because he's sat too long. He's been too long. It's time for him to move on. So sometimes he goes to go and sometimes he goes to be somewhere else. And I learned to figure those things out. And I would see him sometimes trying to decide whether he wanted to spend time with me or go. He would look this way and this way and this way and this way. Like, I'm not going to try to convince you. It's up to you. Make the decision. And he would look at me and look at Vixen, look at me, and look, just like that's the
Wow.
same thing that we all do, right?
Well,
They're not
did
really that much different than us in some ways. And that's one way. I mean, we do the same thing when we go someplace. We're going there to be there or because we had to leave someplace.
you know, how long did your friendship last with Fox?
4 years. So and I can't really say how it ended, but when you get into a relationship with a wild animal, you have to know that they just don't live very long. That's another reason why kids should have pets instead of wild animals. Because because pets last longer. I mean, almost all pets live longer because we don't choose pets if something only lives 4 years.
Right. I mean, there's the vet
Fox
and
could
everything
live
like that.
7 years, I suppose, but but it's unusual. I mean, wild animals just don't live very long, and that's an issue. And some wild animals might live a long time if they're migratory because it's really brutally cold here, but then they're not really with you that often if they're migrating and they don't necessarily come back to the same place. But to stay outdoors, it's a tough world out there. So they are short-lived creatures. And it's one thing that I learned. I think that this there's an anecdote about the rainbow that starts the book. And I think I learned that from the fox that you can't value your relationships based on longevity, based on how long they are. Because some things in this world are so short-lived and they're still really like a rainbow is still really amazing, even
Hmm.
though it's
Yeah.
less than a minute. But I really learned that we have to not just value a relationship based on longevity. But certainly, if you're picking a pet for your kid, you should keep that in mind because,
Yes.
children are going to have enough sadnesses in their life as it is. There's no reason to keep picking pets that are going to die in a few
Yeah.
years.
I don't know if this is the same thing, so you can't answer the question, but I was gonna say, how did you know you were not gonna see him again? Is that the same question?
Oh, yeah, it's you yeah, it will ruin the book, but I did see his little ones after that. After I didn't see him anymore, his little ones would come by, and I've never been able to have this same kind of a relationship. It's really hard.
Hmm.
Not not one in a million, but maybe 1 in 1,000, and I probably won't have 1,000 fox neighbors in my life. So it was rare, but not impossible. I had a vixen on my property for a few years, and she was here last year. She had 8 little ones, but she was never willing to have the relationship with me that Fox did. And I knew that because she would change her schedule up. So she wasn't afraid of me. She wouldn't run away from me. She had her little ones like 3 meters away from my back window, and she was there with them all the time. But when she was alone and not taking care of them, she changed her schedule around. And I knew that from watching her and from having the spy cameras out. So she would do the same thing a couple days in a row, then she would change it up. And you can't be friends that way. Fox
Right.
had to be in the same place at the same time because otherwise you won't connect. So when they're trying to keep their distance from you, they change up their schedule. And she changed up
Hmm.
her schedule for sure. And she was much less diurnal than he was. Because I'm more of a diurnal person too. I don't want to be out all night long hanging out with foxes. And the fact that he liked the daylight made a really big difference. My skunks are the same way here. And I have some skunks that are just crazy in love with the daylight. And I won't ever be friends with them because they're skunks and it's impossible really to, their eyes are
Oh
like,
yeah.
I mean, you can't, they're not afraid of me and they just about walk over my feet sometimes, but you can't actually ever make eye contact with a skunk. So they're not going to be your friends. But some of them are out, in the daytime. A lot of animals that we think are nocturnal and that need to be out at night all the time, I think they're mostly out at night because they're afraid of you or you're bothering them. There's human noise and they've slunk into the nighttime where they can avoid people.
Right.
In order to get close to a fox, it has to be a fox that's willing to take the guts to be out in the daytime, and they have to be adapted to be able to deal. I mean, he seemed to really, really love sunshine. He didn't like having the sun in his eyes. I could see that, but he liked soaking in the sun. I mean, he liked the sun.
Hmm.
He wasn't afraid of it. Of course, I mean, he might have perceived that I protected him. I mean, he might have known that he could hang out in the daytime when I was around. But if he perceived that, then he's the only fox around that has, because the vixen, and I've not ever had a year here when there weren't foxes on my property. Um, why don't they come out all day long? Why aren't they out more often in the day? But they're actually out really very, as the days get shorter, they have they're out at dark all the time. When the days are really long and it doesn't get dark till 9:30 at night, they have no option but to be out, when it's light out, of course, because the days are so long.
Yeah.
But I can see that the other foxes mostly pretty much don't like being out in the middle of the day, like he did. And then you're not really gonna have a friendship with them. Unless you're a night owl, which I'm not. It's not healthy.
You know, I want to be respectful of your time, but I wanted to ask one more question, and I'm curious. You know, I th I am so in some ways I don't know if envious is the right word that I'm trying to say, but um your connection to animals reminds me so much of Genesis in the Bible, where you go back to Adam and Eve. For my listeners, most of them have listened, have heard, me express at times, I'm a believer, I'm a Christian, and I believe in the Bible and I believe in Genesis. And that connection that man once had with animals, that we weren't enemies, we cohabited together. And there was that peace and harmony. And then after the fall, that peace and harmony was broken. And just getting to hear you get a taste of what that would have been like if you were there. For me, is just thrilling. And just, I growing up loved Beatrix Potter. I loved the
Oh,
stories where the animals would talk and they would connect and they would all have friends. And I just loved those stories. And I always thought, and sometimes people make fun of you because, I mean, in a good way, they're not trying to be mean to you, but they're like, they really don't understand what you're doing. You're talking to this squirrel. The squirrel has no clue what you're saying. And I've always, and maybe to my, embarrassment, but I've always found animals to understand more than I think we give them credit for.
they definitely do, and they do understand when you're talking to them. They don't understand the words, but even something as small as a squirrel and as different from us as a squirrel, they know when you're yelling at them. They know when
Yes,
you're
yeah.
mad. They know when you're calm and it's okay for them to come around. they definitely know some things for sure. I mean, there are certain things that are just basic to animals. So animals can recognize, like I said, we have inherited the ability to be great judges of character, and we also understand certain sounds. The sounds that we find scary, they find scary too. And the
Right.
sounds we find loving and attractive and peaceful, they like those sounds too. Fox had this sense of aesthetics, which I hadn't realized until I got to know him. But when the sky's turning all different colors at night, he would face that way. But he must have for a reason. Why wouldn't he? Why would he want to be up on the rock where he could see over the grasses and things and enjoy certain views if it wasn't that animals also have a sense of aesthetics just like we do?
Yeah. Well, I wanted to ask as a follow-up, despite that beauty, I mean, are you ever lonely being in your home by yourself without?
I think I'm glad you asked that. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to talk about it. But one of the things that I hope people will get out of the book is to, if they're lonely or if they know people who are lonely, loving nature and the natural world, you will just never be lonely because nature it's a community that it's your community. You belong to it. Humans haven't always been all over the place. We've been living in isolated places, so we're used to having nature as our community. And you can't possibly ever be lonely. There's so much life out there, and they all are part of your connections, all of them. It's just impossible for me to ever feel lonely. I get up in the morning and there's deer out there or the rabbit or something, and I feel like I know them, but they know me too.
I guess
And
in the sense that like you can't have an emotional conversation with them and hear an emotional response, if you know what I mean.
you can't have complicated conversations with them, but I think animals would know if you were really, really sad. If you're outside crying, I haven't tried this. I think they would feel like some animals would recognize that they had to comfort you. There's a lot of deer around here. They might not all recognize it, but some would. And if you're really upset, they would recognize that too. And I mean, when you go outside and yell and they run off, don't even lick my lilac one more time, then they leave. But because I don't want them biting my lilacs. But if you don't want them to run away and you come outside and you don't want to upset them and have them waste energy, then I start talking to them saying, don't run off, don't run off. It's okay. It's okay. Stay, stay, stay. And then I sit and they understand that and then they sit. But they also understand it when I say, don't even touch that lilac.
How
Don't.
selfish of you to deprive them of the lilac, Dr. Raven.
There's
Could
so
you
much
possibly?
land here. Believe I cannot believe that they have to and then they don't even like lilac. They just eat it and spit it up, which is really irritating.
Well, Dr. Catherine, I mean, I just want to say, first of all, this has been one of the most engaging, fascinating interviews I've ever done. Your story is so unique. I highly encourage listeners, please get her book. Obviously, there were a lot of things that were interesting spoilers she couldn't give us that you definitely should get the book and know more. But um, I thank you so much for this, and it was a gift to get to connect with you and learn your story, part of your
Thank
story.
you. And there's a scene in there where I prayed that Fox would return. Do you remember that? They'll have to find that when they get through. Um, but I came to a very interesting conclusion about God and foxes at that time. So it it is it was just a great experience for me having Fox as a friend. So forever, it changed my life forever. I hope it changes your readers too. Yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Raven. I'm sure it will make an impact, so I appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Thank
You have
you.
a good day.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.